Galactic Empire declares war. Humanity barely notices Part 1. The Declaration, the Velthari. Empire had ruled the stars for longer than most species could remember. Their home world sat at the center of 17 conquered star systems, each one filled with species who had learned the hard way that resistance against the Velthari was pointless. Their fleet numbered in the hundreds of thousands. Their soldiers were bred for war across countless generations. When Supreme Commander Zeroth stood before the Grand Assembly and announced that the time had come to add Earth to their collection, the entire empire erupted in celebration. Zeroth was tall even by Velthari standards, with dark purple skin and 4 arms that he used expressively when giving speeches. He had personally overseen the conquest of 6 worlds, and he considered this next one to be a simple matter. The humans were a young species, barely a century into space travel. Their little planet orbited a small yellow sun at the edge of an unremarkable galaxy arm. They would fall quickly, as all the others had. The declaration of war was transmitted across every frequency the Velthari could manage. They had spent years intercepting human communications, learning their languages, studying their culture. The message was broadcast in English, Mandarin, Spanish, Arabic, and 37 other human languages. It was formal and terrifying, filled with promises of destruction and demands for immediate surrender. On Earth. It was a Tuesday. Pete Sullivan was working the night shift at a satellite monitoring station in Colorado Springs. He was 43 years old, divorced, and mainly took the night shifts because they were quiet and let him catch up on his podcasts. He was halfway through a ham sandwich when his computer made an unusual sound. Pete looked at the screen with mild interest. Strange signals came through sometimes. Usually they turned out to be nothing, just space noise or equipment glitches. He ran this new signal through the standard filters and frowned when words started appearing on his screen. The translation software was giving him something about supreme commanders and galactic empires and the complete subjugation of Earth. Pete read it twice, took another bite of his sandwich, and then forwarded the whole thing to his supervisor with a short note explaining that someone was probably playing a prank with their equipment again. His supervisor, Linda Garcia, was currently lying on a beach in Cancun, drinking something with an umbrella in it and absolutely not checking her work email. She would not see Pete's message for another 6 days. The Velthari Armada began its journey toward Earth. 12,000 warships moved in perfect formation, their engines burning with the power of captured stars. At maximum speed, they would reach the human solar system in approximately 3 Earth weeks. Zeroth spent this time practicing his victory speeches in front of a mirror and debating which human cities should be destroyed first as examples. He eventually settled on New York and Beijing, purely for symbolic reasons. Back on Earth, life continued normally. A reality television show was causing arguments across social media. A famous actor announced a divorce. Gas prices went up slightly, and everyone complained about it. The signal that Pete Sullivan had forwarded sat in Linda Garcia's inbox, completely ignored. While she ordered another drink and worked on her tan dot 3 days after the initial transmission, a junior analyst at the Pentagon named Kevin Torres stumbled across a report about unusual signals being detected by various monitoring stations around the world. Kevin was 26 years old and eager to prove himself. He had joined the Defense Intelligence Agency right out of college and spent most of his time doing boring work that no one seemed to care about. This signal, though, was different. Kevin ran it through every translation program he could find, checked it against known hoaxes and pranks, and felt his stomach drop when he realized it might actually be real. He tried to escalate the information through proper channels. This turned out to be much harder than expected. His immediate supervisor was on paternity leave. The person covering for his supervisor was dealing with a completely unrelated crisis involving a misplaced shipment of equipment. The form Kevin needed to file a high-priority report required 3 signatures, and one of the required signers had retired 2 months ago, and no one had updated the system. Kevin spent 2 full days navigating bureaucracy that would have impressed even the most jaded government employee. He filled out forms, made phone calls, sent emails, and was placed on hold for a combined total of 4 hours. By the time his report finally reached someone with actual authority, 5 days had passed since the original transmission. Colonel Frank Morrison was having a bad week even before the alien situation landed on his desk. He was 54 years old, counting down the years until retirement, and increasingly convinced that the military had found new and creative ways to waste his time. When an urgent folder appeared on his desk with the words "possible extraterrestrial communication" written on it, he assumed it was some kind of joke. He read the report anyway, because Frank Morrison did everything by the book, even when the book seemed stupid. 20 minutes later, he was on the phone with people whose names he was not allowed to write down, explaining that yes, he had verified the authenticity of the report, and no, he did not think it was a hoax, and yes, he understood how insane this sounded. His wife called him around dinner time, asking when he would be home. Frank told her he might be working late and that she should not wait up. This turned out to be an understatement of historic proportions. Meanwhile, across the internet, a few independent astronomers had noticed something strange approaching the solar system. They posted about it on forums and social media, sharing telescope images and calculations that suggested a large number of objects were heading toward Earth at incredible speed. They were mostly ignored. One popular science blogger called them attention seekers. A late-night television host made jokes about tinfoil hats. A verified account on social media pointed out that the same people had predicted alien invasions before, and nothing had ever happened. The objects kept coming in the Valkyrie fleet. Xyroth received reports from his advanced scouts with growing confusion. The humans had received his declaration of war. The scouts had confirmed that the transmission had been detected by multiple human monitoring stations. Yet there was no panic, no mass mobilization, no desperate attempts at communication. There was, instead, a vigorous public debate about whether a popular hamburger chain had secretly changed the recipe for its special sauce. Xyroth did not understand humans, but he decided that their strange behavior did not matter. They would learn to fear the Valkyrie soon enough. Everyone did, eventually. He returned to practicing his victory speech, completely unaware that somewhere on Earth, a tired colonel was making phone calls that would change the course of galactic history. Galactic Empire declares war. Humanity barely notices Part 2. First Contact Protocol. The Valkyrie Advanced Scouts had been watching Earth from behind the moon for 11 days now. Their cloaking technology was among the best in the galaxy, rendering their small observation vessels completely invisible to human detection systems. They watched. They listened. They grew increasingly confused. Scout leader Krath was a veteran of 7 planetary conquests. He had seen species react to Valkyrie declarations of war in many different ways. Some panicked immediately, their civilizations collapsing into chaos before the main fleet even arrived. Others mobilized desperately, building weapons and defenses in a futile attempt to resist. A few had tried to flee, abandoning their home worlds and generation ships that the Valkyrie hunted down at their leisure. He had never seen a species simply ignore the threat. Krath spent hours analyzing human news broadcasts, trying to understand what he was seeing. A cat video had more engagement than coverage of the approaching alien armada. When journalists did mention the strange objects approaching Earth, they treated it as a curiosity, something to fill time between more important stories about celebrities and sports. He sent his report to Supreme Commander Xyroth with growing uncertainty. The humans appear to be either supremely confident or profoundly stupid, he wrote. They have made no defensive preparations. Their military installations show no increased activity. Their leaders have not addressed their populations. I am unable to determine if this is a deliberate strategy or genuine indifference. Xyroth read the report and dismissed Krath's concerns. He had seen denial before. Some species simply could not accept the reality of their situation until Velthari ships were burning their cities. The humans would learn soon enough. What Xyroth did not know was that Earth's response was happening, just not in the ways his scouts knew to look for deep beneath the Pentagon. In a room that did not officially exist, a group of very serious people had gathered around a very large table. Colonel Frank Morrison stood at the front of the room, feeling distinctly out of his depth as he explained the situation to people whose security clearances were significantly higher than his own. General Patricia Webb sat at the head of the table. She was 61 years old, with gray hair cut short and eyes that had seen things she would never discuss. She had commanded troops in 3 different wars and had a reputation for being unflappable. Nothing surprised her anymore. This, though, was testing her limits. Let me make sure I understand correctly, she said, her voice calm and measured. An alien empire has formally declared war on Earth. They sent us an official notice about it. And they're currently on their way here with a fleet of warships. That is correct, ma'am, Frank confirmed. And they gave us advance warning because that's apparently how they do things. It appears to be a cultural practice, ma'am. Some kind of honor code. They believe it makes their conquests more legitimate if they give the enemy a chance to surrender first. General Webb leaned back in her chair. A small smile crossed her face that made several people in the room nervous. Well, that was very considerate of them. The briefing continued. Intelligence analysts had been working around the clock since Frank's initial report, pulling together every piece of information they could find about the approaching fleet. What they had discovered was surprising. Dr. Hannah West from DARPA took over the presentation. She was a small woman with glasses and messy brown hair, the kind of person who looked like she should be teaching at a university rather than developing weapons for the military. She had been working on theoretical defense systems for a decade, always preparing for a threat that most people thought would never come. We've been analyzing the Velthari technology based on their transmissions and long-range observations of their fleet, Hannah explained. And frankly, it's not as advanced as we expected. The room stirred. This was not what anyone had anticipated. Their weapons appear to be primarily plasma-based, Hannah continued. Powerful against shields and hull plating, but their effective range is limited by energy dispersion. Their propulsion systems are efficient, but not revolutionary. And their communication encryption is surprisingly weak. How weak? General Webb asked. Hannah allowed herself a small smile. A graduate student at MAT cracked it in 4 hours. She thought it was some kind of puzzle game her professor had sent her. We now have access to most of their fleet communications. The room was silent for a moment as this information sank in. So what you're telling me, General Webb said slowly, is that this galactic empire has been conquering worlds with technology that isn't actually that far ahead of our own. That's exactly what I'm telling you, ma'am. We believe they've expanded primarily through intimidation. Most species in their territory surrender without fighting. They've developed excellent propaganda and fear tactics, but their actual military technology has stagnated. They haven't faced a serious opponent in thousands of years. A man in a dark suit at the end of the table spoke up. He had not been introduced, and his name tag was conspicuously blank. What about their numbers? They have 12,000 ships heading toward us. Numbers are a concern, Hannah admitted. But we have some advantages they don't know about. We've been preparing for something like this for a long time. Not officially, of course, but DARPA has been developing countermeasures for hypothetical alien threats for decades. Most of it was classified as too expensive or too impractical for real-world use. But the technology exists. General Webb stood up and walked to the window that looked out onto a wall of screens, showing real-time data from around the world. What are we talking about here? What kind of countermeasures? Electromagnetic pulse weapons capable of disabling electronic systems across a wide area. Railguns that can accelerate projectiles to a fraction of the speed of light. Kinetic interceptors designed to destroy incoming objects through sheer impact force. Directed energy weapons that are still technically experimental but functional. And all of this is ready to deploy? Hannah hesitated. Most of it is ready to test. We've never had a reason to use any of it for real. There will be some improvisation involved. General Webb turned back to face the room. Her expression was thoughtful rather than worried. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we have an opportunity here. These aliens have made a mistake. They assumed we were primitive, helpless, easy prey. They announced their attack weeks in advance. They use encryption that college students can crack. And they have no idea what we're capable of. She looked at each person in the room in turn. I want every military asset we have ready for deployment within 1 week. I want DARPA's experimental systems moved to operational status. I want our allies briefed and brought into the planning. And I want all of this done quietly, without causing public panic. What about the politicians, ma'am? Someone asked. General Webb's smile widened slightly. Let the politicians argue. By the time they finish their committee meetings and procedural votes, this will all be over. One way or another. The meeting adjourned, and the real work began. Around the world, in classified facilities and secret installations, weapons that had never been tested were being prepared. Scientists who had spent their careers working on theoretical projects were suddenly told that their work was about to become very practical and in space. The Valkyrie fleet continued its approach, completely unaware that everything they believed about humanity was wrong. Galactic Empire declares war. Humanity barely notices Part 3. The arrival of Valkyrie Armada dropped out of warp space, just beyond the orbit of Mars. It was a sight that would have terrified any species in the known galaxy. 12,000 warships arranged in perfect geometric formations, their dark purple hulls gleaming against the blackness of space. Each ship was covered in weapons, their surfaces bristling with plasma cannons and missile launchers and systems designed to turn planets into ash. Supreme Commander Zeroth stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Conquest, and gazed at the distant blue dot that was Earth. He felt a surge of satisfaction. This would be an easy victory. His name would be remembered alongside the greatest conquerors in Valkyrie history. He ordered a new transmission sent to the human governments. This one was shorter and more direct. Surrender immediately or face complete destruction. They had one planetary rotation to comply. The transmission was received by every major government on Earth within minutes. Emergency meetings were called. Leaders were woken from their sleep. The United Nations Security Council convened its fastest emergency session in history. And then the arguing began. The American delegation accused the Russian delegation of not taking the situation seriously enough. The Russian delegation accused the Chinese delegation of trying to use the crisis for political advantage. The French delegation demanded that any response be coordinated through proper diplomatic channels. The British delegation suggested tea and calm discussion. Meanwhile, the actual response was already happening far from the conference rooms and political debates. The cool response was already happening far from the conference rooms and political debates. The Kongressman's International Space Station had been quietly converted into a forward observation post over the past week. Its normal crew had been replaced by military personnel from 6 different nations, all of whom had been told only what they needed to know. Commander Rick Palmer, a former Navy pilot who had always secretly hoped something like this would happen, was in charge of the station. He floated in the observation module, watching the distant Velthary fleet through a modified telescope that was definitely not supposed to be aboard the station. The enemy ships hung in space like a dark cloud, motionless and waiting. "They're holding position," reported Lieutenant Maria Santos, his second in command. She was tracking the fleet with every sensor they had. "Just sitting there, not doing anything. They're waiting for us to surrender," Rick said. "That's what they do. They send their scary message and wait for the other side to give up. And if we don't?" Rick grinned. It was not a pleasant grin. Then they're going to find out that humans don't give up easily. Around the world, military forces were moving into position with unusual coordination. The Americans, Russians, Chinese, Europeans, and even countries that normally refused to work together had agreed to a joint defense plan. It was not perfect. There was still arguing and mistrust and old grudges that refused to die. But when faced with extinction, humanity had found a way to cooperate. The USS Montana, a nuclear submarine that had undergone extensive and highly classified modifications, was currently positioned in the Pacific Ocean. Its captain, Commander Jake Wilson, had been given orders that still seemed impossible, even though he had read them 5 times. "You want me to launch one exactly?" he had asked during his briefing. "A modified nuclear warhead equipped with electromagnetic pulse enhancement," the scientist had explained. "It will be carried into orbit by a rocket launched from the deck. When it detonates in proximity to the alien fleet, it should disable their electronic systems across a significant area." Should? We've never actually tested it against alien technology, but our analysis suggests their systems are vulnerable to electromagnetic interference. Their shielding is designed for energy weapons, not electromagnetic pulses. Jake had accepted the orders because that was what commanders did. Now he waited beneath the waves, ready to fire on command, hoping that the scientists were right. Similar preparations were happening everywhere. Railgun installations on the lunar surface were powering up for the first time. Satellite weapons that officially did not exist were being activated. Fighter jets equipped with experimental weapons were standing by at bases around the world. Even civilian technology was being pressed into service, with private space companies contributing rockets and equipment to the defense effort. At the Pentagon, General Patricia Webb coordinated everything from a command center that looked like something from a science fiction movie. Screens covered every wall, showing troop movements, fleet positions, communication intercepts, and 100 other pieces of information that were constantly updating. "Status report," she demanded. "All assets are in position." "Ma'am," reported Colonel Frank Morrison, who had not slept in 3 days and was running on coffee and determination. "Railguns are charged. EMP weapons are ready for deployment. Fighter wings are standing by. Naval assets are positioned for maximum coverage." "What about the politicians?" Frank allowed himself a small smile. "Still arguing about whether to form a special committee to discuss the formation of a response team." "Good. Let them argue." General Webb turned to face the main screen, which showed a real-time image of the Velthary fleet. "How long until their deadline expires?" "Approximately 14 hours, ma'am. Then we wait. Let them think we're scared. Let them think we're debating surrender. And when that deadline passes, we show them what humanity is really made of." Across the room, Dr. Hannah West was monitoring communications from the Velthary fleet. Thanks to that MIT graduate student, they could hear everything the enemy was saying. Most of it was boring military chatter, but occasionally something interesting came through. "They're confused," Hannah reported. Their scouts don't understand why we haven't shown any visible response. They think we might be planning some kind of trick, but they can't figure out what. Are they worried? Not really. They still think this will be easy. They're already planning which humans to take as slaves and which cities to use as examples. General Webb nodded slowly. Good. Let them keep thinking that. 14 hours was not a long time to wait. But for the humans who knew what was coming, it felt like an eternity. Soldiers checked their weapons. Sailors stared at their screens. Pilots sat in their cockpits, ready to launch at a moment's notice. Scientists ran last-minute calculations, hoping their theories would prove correct. And somewhere in the vastness of space, the Valkyrie waited for the surrender that would never come. When the deadline finally arrived, it passed without ceremony. No white flags were raised. No desperate pleas for mercy were transmitted. The humans simply ignored it, just as they had ignored everything else. Supreme Commander Xyrath was annoyed. This was not how things were supposed to work. Species were supposed to recognize the hopelessness of their situation and submit. That was the natural order of things. Very well, he announced to his bridge crew. If they will not surrender, we will teach them the price of defiance. All ships, begin attack formation. We advance on Earth. The fleet began to move, 12,000 ships surging forward like a wave of death. They had done this many times before. It was routine, simple, easy. They had no idea what was waiting for them. Galactic Empire declares war. Humanity barely notices Part 4. The Battle of Mars. The first sign that something was wrong came exactly 12 seconds after the Valkyrie fleet began its advance. A satellite that the humans had, labeled as a weather monitoring station, suddenly activated and broadcast a pulse of electromagnetic energy so powerful that it overwhelmed every sensor. In the front third of the armada, ships that had been cruising forward suddenly went dark. Engines failed. Weapon systems shut down. Life support flickered and died. Over 4,000 Valkyrie warships became floating metal coffins in the space of a heartbeat. Supreme Commander Xyrath stared at his tactical display with genuine disbelief. The icons representing his forward ships had turned from green to gray, indicating total system failure. Nothing in his experience had prepared him for this. No enemy had ever struck so quickly or so devastatingly. What happened? He demanded. Report. His tactical officer was frantically working her console, trying to make sense of the data. Some kind of energy pulse, Commander. It overloaded our systems. The ships aren't destroyed, but they're completely disabled. How is that possible? Our shields should protect against energy attacks. It wasn't a conventional energy weapon, Commander. It was electromagnetic in nature. Our shields are not designed to filter that type of interference. Before Xyrath could respond, the second wave of attacks arrived. These came from the moon, from installations that the Valkyrie scouts had assumed were mining operations or scientific outposts. Railguns, hidden beneath lunar rock and powered by nuclear reactors, opened fire with devastating precision. The projectiles were simple chunks of tungsten and steel, nothing sophisticated at all. But they were traveling at a fraction of the speed of light, and at that velocity, nothing could stop them. They punched through Valkyrie hull plating like needles through paper. Ships that had conquered star systems were torn apart by what amounted to very fast rocks. Lieutenant Commander Amy Chun sat in the control room of Lunar Defense Installation 7, watching her screens with professional satisfaction. She had spent 8 years training for this moment, running simulations, calculating trajectories, learning to operate weapons that most people did not know existed. Now all that preparation was paying off. Target Group 3 disabled, she reported. Moving to Target Group 4. The railguns fired again. their electromagnetic accelerators hurling death across the void. Each shot was perfectly aimed, guided by targeting computers that had been designed by the best minds humanity had to offer. The Valkyrie had no time to react, no chance to adapt. They were being slaughtered on Earth. The response continued. Rockets launched from ships and submarines, carrying warheads designed to detonate in space. Satellites that had been dormant for years suddenly came to life, adding their firepower to the attack. From 6 different countries, weapons that had been developed in secret were finally revealed. Commander Jake Wilson felt his submarine shudder as another missile left its deck. The modified nuclear warhead arced into the sky, climbing higher until it disappeared from sight. Somewhere far above, it would add its fury to the chaos engulfing the Valkyrie fleet. Missile away, his weapons officer confirmed. Tracking nominal. Detonation in 6 minutes. Jake nodded and checked his tactical display. The enemy fleet was in complete disarray. Ships were scattering in all directions, trying to escape the coordinated barrage. Some were attempting to fire back, but their plasma weapons were designed for close combat, not the long-range engagement the humans had forced upon them. The Valkyrie died in the millions on the bridge of the Eternal Conquest. Supreme Commander Zeroth watched his empire's greatest fleet being destroyed. His tactical display had become a nightmare of red warning lights and gray status indicators. Ships were dying faster than his officers could report them. "Commander, we need to retreat," his aide pleaded. "We cannot win this battle." Zeroth wanted to argue, but he could not deny the truth before his eyes. In less than an hour, he had lost over half his fleet. The remaining ships were scattered, damaged, their crews in panic. The humans had not even sent a single vessel to face them. They were being killed by weapons fired from a planet and a moon, by satellites and missiles and things they did not understand. "All ships, fall back," he ordered, his voice hollow with shock. "Retreat to minimum warp distance." The surviving Valkyrie ships turned and fled. They engaged their engines at maximum power, desperate to escape the killing zone. For the first time in the history of the Empire, a Valkyrie fleet was running from battle, but the humans were not finished. A second fleet appeared in the path of the retreating Valkyrie. It was small by comparison, only a few hundred vessels, cobbled together from every space-capable nation on Earth. They were not warships in any traditional sense. Most were converted cargo vessels, modified rockets, hastily armed spacecraft that had never been designed for combat. But they carried weapons, railguns and missiles, and the same electromagnetic pulse devices that had crippled the Valkyrie forward fleet. And they were positioned exactly where the enemy needed to go. The retreating Valkyrie found themselves trapped between 2 fires. Behind them, the lunar installations continued their relentless bombardment. Ahead of them, the human fleet blocked their escape route. There was nowhere to run. The battle lasted 6 hours in total. It would have been shorter, but the human commanders wanted to capture some ships intact for study. This proved difficult, as the Valkyrie began self-destructing their vessels rather than allow them to fall into enemy hands. Zeroth himself ordered the destruction of hundreds of ships, preferring to kill his own soldiers rather than let humans learn their secrets. In the end, it made no difference. The human forces were relentless and methodical. They destroyed what they could not capture. They captured what would not self-destruct. They chased down escaping shuttles and disabled fleeing ships. They gave no quarter and asked for none. Marine Sergeant Dennis Cooper was part of the boarding team that captured the Eternal Conquest. His squad cut their way through the flagships, all using tools that had been designed for space construction and repurposed for war. They moved through corridors filled with smoke and floating debris, shooting at anything that moved, working their way toward the bridge. They found Zeroth hiding behind his command chair. The Supreme Commander of the Valkyrie Empire, conqueror of worlds, was curled into a ball and whimpering. He had never experienced combat before. He had never needed to. His victories had always come through intimidation and overwhelming force. He had no idea how to handle actual resistance. Dennis looked at the pathetic figure and felt something between disgust and pity. He lowered his weapon and gestured to his squad mates. "Take him alive. He looks important. Fancy uniform and everything." They bound Zeros' forearms and dragged him out of his ruined ship. He did not resist. He could not. Everything he believed about his empire and his people had been shattered in a single afternoon. The humans were not primitive. They were not helpless. They were the most terrifying species he had ever encountered, and they had barely tried. When the final count was done, humanity had lost 12 soldiers and 47 more had been wounded. Most of the casualties were from accidents during the hasty preparations, not from enemy action. The Valkyrie had lost over 11,000 ships and millions of lives. It was not a battle. It was a massacre. And across the galaxy, those who were watching took very careful notes. Galactic Empire declares war. Humanity barely notices Part 5. The aftermath news of the Valkyrie defeat spread across the galaxy faster than any ship could travel. Every species with access to interstellar communication heard the reports. The Valkyrie Empire, dominant power of the region for over 10,000 years, had been crushed by a species that had achieved spaceflight less than a century ago. An armada of 12,000 ships had been reduced to scattered debris and captured hulks. The legendary Supreme Commander Zeroth had been taken prisoner by soldiers who treated him as a minor inconvenience. The galaxy had never seen anything like it. On Earth, the reaction was surprisingly muted. The major news networks covered the battle for approximately 1 week before moving on to other stories. There was a scandal involving a popular musician. A major sports championship was approaching. A new video game had been released, and everyone was arguing about whether it lived up to expectations. The alien war became yesterday's news almost. Immediately, this confused the galactic observers. More than anything else, Ambassador Kryn of the Thessali Confederation was among the first to arrive at Earth, seeking diplomatic relations. The Thessali were a cautious species, four-eyed and four-armed, who had survived for millennia by carefully studying potential threats before engaging with them. They had sent observers to witness the battle from a safe distance, and what those observers had reported had frightened them badly. Kryn met with Secretary of State Margaret Flynn in a conference room at the United Nations building in New York. Margaret was a practical woman in her late 50s, with gray-streaked hair and a reputation for direct speaking. She had been handling international crises for 30 years, and she approached this alien diplomat with the same calm professionalism she brought to everything else. "We appreciate you coming all this way," Margaret said, pouring coffee for herself and offering some to her guest. Kryn declined politely, unsure if the dark liquid was safe for the Thessali biology. "We came to assess the situation," Kryn admitted, "to determine if humanity represents a threat to our confederation." "And what did you determine?" Kryn's four eyes blinked in a pattern that humans would later learn indicated uncertainty. "We determined that you are the most confusing species we have ever encountered." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "The Valkyrie declared war on you. They sent a fleet that had conquered 17 star systems. They announced their intentions weeks in advance, and your species barely noticed. You continued your normal activities as if nothing was happening. Your entertainment programs received more attention than the approaching armada. We monitored your communications. Your people were arguing about food recipes while warships gathered to destroy your civilization." Margaret took a sip of her coffee. "We had the situation under control. You had nothing visible under control. Your governments argued pointlessly. Your military showed no obvious mobilization. Your people remained completely unconcerned. We assumed you were simply too primitive to understand the danger. We expected to watch your species be conquered or destroyed. And instead, you destroyed the Veltri fleet in 6 hours. You used weapons we did not know you possessed. You coordinated a planetary defense without any apparent preparation. You captured the supreme commander of an empire that has terrorized this region of space for 10,000 years. And then you went back to arguing about food recipes. Margaret smiled slightly. We're a complicated species. You are terrifying, Kryn said flatly. My people have studied many civilizations. We understand fear and we understand confidence. What we do not understand is indifference. You faced extinction and you simply did not care. That makes you unpredictable. Unpredictable species are dangerous. The diplomatic meetings continued for weeks. More species sent representatives, all with similar concerns. They wanted to understand how humanity had done what they had done. They wanted to assess whether Earth represented a threat to their own civilizations. They wanted, more than anything, to know what the humans were planning next. The answer, it turned out, was nothing in particular. Humanity returned to its normal patterns almost immediately after the battle. The captured Veltri technology was studied by scientists around the world, leading to several interesting advances in propulsion and energy systems. The prisoners were eventually returned to their empire as part of a peace treaty that included generous trade agreements and firm boundaries. Xyroth himself was released after 6 months. A broken figure who would never hold power again. Life went on. A year after the battle, a documentary was produced about the war. It aired on a Tuesday evening and received moderate ratings, losing viewership to a competition reality show and a popular crime drama. A book about the conflict was written by a retired colonel and spent 3 weeks on bestseller lists before being replaced by a celebrity memoir. The soldiers who had fought in the battle received medals and recognition. Most of them returned to their normal lives. Marine Sergeant Dennis Cooper, the man who had captured Xyroth, was interviewed several times about his experience. He always gave the same answer when asked how it felt to take down the leader of a galactic empire. Honestly, he wasn't that impressive up close. Just another guy who thought he was important. I've arrested tougher people in bar fights. The galactic community officially listed Earth as a Class 7 protected world. This designation was reserved for civilizations that were too dangerous to interfere with, but too unpredictable to ignore. It meant that no species was allowed to attack Earth or attempt to manipulate its development in any way. The humans were to be left alone. The unofficial reason for this designation was simpler, shared in hushed conversations among diplomats and military leaders across 100 worlds. The humans were crazy. Not evil, not aggressive, not even particularly warlike. Just crazy. They faced extinction and shrugged. They developed terrifying weapons and forgot about them until they were needed. They fought with the fury of demons and then went back to watching television. No one wanted to find out what would happen if humanity ever decided to take the galaxy seriously. Years passed. Earth slowly integrated into the galactic community, trading technology and culture with species across known space. Human products became popular on distant worlds. Human music and stories spread to alien civilizations. Human tourists began visiting other planets, and alien tourists came to Earth, marveling at a species that seemed incapable of treating anything as truly important. On the 10th anniversary of the battle, a reporter asked Dr. Hannah West, who had led the technical response to the Veltri invasion, what lessons humanity had learned from the experience. Hannah thought about the question for a long moment. We learned that we're not alone in the universe. We learned that there are threats out there that we need to be prepared for. We learned that when we work together, we can accomplish incredible things. And what about the galactic community? What did they learn about us? Hannah smiled. It was the same smile she had worn when explaining to General Webb how a graduate student had cracked alien encryption. They learned not to mess with us. And honestly, that's probably the most important lesson of all. Somewhere across the galaxy, in the ruins of the Velthari Empire, a species that had once considered itself invincible was slowly rebuilding. They had learned humility for the first time in their long history. They had learned that the universe contained things they did not understand and could not defeat. And they had learned, above all else, to never underestimate the small blue planet at the edge of an unremarkable galaxy arm. The humans, for their part, had already moved on to the next argument, the next scandal, the next distraction. They would be ready if anyone else came for them. But until then, there were more important things to worry about. Someone, after all, had definitely changed the secret sauce recipe. And that kind of thing simply could not be ignored.